Hi, my name is Friedrich Sarah E. Thompson, you can call me Fred, and today I'm going to be talking about a book whose title I never thought I'd say with a straight face. I work in a library, and a pretty big library at that, so we get a lot of weird shit coming in. We get a lot of, let's be nice and call them traditional pulp fantasy and sci-fi, you know, with the titties out on the cover, and everybody's just wearing like a small amount of fur if it's fantasy, or like a small amount of some miscellaneous steel if it's sci-fi, but they might have the big fishbowl helmets, that kind of stuff. And if you came up to me and said, hey, I want you to read this book called Space Unicorn Blues, I'm gonna let that title sink in. Space Unicorn Blues. I would imagine the fishbowl helmets and the titties out, and perhaps steel and fur, because space unicorn, oh, it's some kind of genre blending thing. I'm gonna be dead set honest with you. I'm not a huge fan of most genre blending between sci-fi and fantasy. Up until now, I think I would say my favorite has been Star Wars, which is just a fantasy story that someone wrapped in steel. It has everything from the magic system to rescuing the princess, to the jumping from place to place to place to place, to the guy in the black armor and the deep voiced Sauron. Forget I did that Darth Vader impression. Sorry, my cat is yelling at me. I'm over here, idiot! Yeah, over here. But most of the time when I see people trying to blend sci-fi and fantasy, it comes off as sometimes like they're trying to explain away the magic, which takes away the intrigue, or they're just shoving in random things from fantasy, like, oh, we're in space and there's a space dragon. It's like, well, are you gonna explain that? Is it gonna go anywhere? Or did you just want to put a dragon in your space story? But it can be done well. It can be done incredibly well. And that's what we're here to talk about today. It's my Unicorn Brooch. I am themed. Space Unicorn Blues, which is a title I will never get tired of saying, is of equal parts sci-fi and fantasy, as you can tell by the title, but mostly blues. The thing that makes this book so good is that it is about a unicorn in space, a unicorn from space, but it's also about colonialism and sexism and homophobia and just bigotry. It's a book about bigotry, where the main character is a unicorn from space. And I know what you're thinking. This sounds like an incredibly heavy-handed metaphor. It kind of is, but at the same time, the unicorn is also Indian. This sounds like an incredibly poor taste joke, but no, his mother's surname was Ramanathan. His father was named Cobalt. He's half unicorn, half human. And they don't tell you until up and towards the end of the book that this union was one of magic. So you spend a couple of 100 pages wondering, hey, how the fuck did this lady fuck a unicorn? She didn't. You get a clue that he was not formed the fun way in the beginning of the book, where an old friend of his lays on a bit of a flirt, and he's not enjoying it greatly, and she jumps back and it's like, oh, well, the rumor's true, are all unicorns asexual? And he's like, oh, no, I'm half unicorn, I got bigger things on my mind. Like colonialism. This is a book about colonialism. This has been a very weird video up until now. I should probably explain what the hell I'm talking about. Space Unicorn Blues follows the story of Gary Cobalt as he is released from prison for murdering someone, which he did actually do, and attempts to get his spaceship back. He gets it back pretty quickly, honestly. The problem is the person who had it before him agreed to run a cargo run. This sounds pretty boring and kind of sad. It is sad, but it's not boring because they're taking the cargo from a group of interstellar nuns who are quasi-tolerated by the oppressive colonialist government to the Pimmy Summit. Yeah. You don't really get what the Pimmy are for a little while. It's a little confusing, but it is explained very clearly as you get further into the book. Let's say, for simplicity's sake, there are 3 levels of aliens. The first level is human. Humans have recently discovered interstellar drive, the ability to travel from star to star. In doing so, they have come into contact with the second level of alien, the Bala. The Bala are a loosely associated group of aliens, which are incredibly biodiverse, and each different kind of Bala corresponds to a kind of supernatural mythological creature in a culture from Earth, which is kind of a weird thing to happen, but you just sort of accept it, because it is not the weirdest thing happening in this book by a long shot. As I said, Gary Cobalt is part unicorn. His father, Cobalt, is a full unicorn. And yeah, that comes with all the unicorn baggage you can expect. Both Gary and his father, and all the unicorn's blood, can heal wounds, which means Gary himself is pretty much auto-regenerating whenever he gets injured. But it also means that people are eager to get at his blood at all times, which is a fun way to live. But that's not the thing they're most focused on. Because, as I said about humans discovering interstellar drive, do you want to know what it's powered by? Unicorn horns! Do you want to know how unicorns grow horns? By eating bones! That sounds weirdly convenient, that their body parts are useful, you might be saying, but no, that's the core metaphor of this book. Actually, all of the Bala's body parts are useful for something. For example, if you would like a disguise, you can easily create one by slathering yourself in pixie semen. I should have mentioned, this book is R-rated. There isn't actually any graphic sex, but there is a lot of discussion of sex, and there is a lot of graphic violence. So if that's not your scene, then I'm afraid you won't get to enjoy the majesty that is Space Unicorn Blues. But as I was saying, each of the Bala have some kind of body part that's useful, except for a few. Some of them aren't that useful. Because Gary is like a bipedal centaur, where he kind of looks like a fawn, is basically it. He's got a human top half, and then he's got 2 unicorn legs. He goes around disguising himself as a fawn for most of the book, so people won't try to like get at his blood and horn, urgently trying to harvest him while still keeping him alive so he can produce more. Yeah, think about that for a while. The thing is, fawns aren't that useful, but don't worry, the human colonizers have figured out that they can use them as pets. It's not subtle the way that they talk about the harvesting of literal bodies as a resource, but it doesn't need to be subtle because it's strong. It's a very good metaphor for colonialism because it isn't really a metaphor. It's a straight up continuation of the colonialist values that underlie all of humanity and the planet Earth today. If we had interstellar drive tomorrow, I guarantee you that it would go a little something like this, with a lot of the pillaging and murder and stealing of body parts to make human life easier. Now you may be wondering, hey, this is some wild shit you're saying, but what's the fucking plot of this thing? I'm glad you asked, person I just made up. Here's the thing. Gary gets out of prison. He wants to get his spaceship back. His spaceship is currently in possession of the person who enslaved him. This is Jenny Parata. Jenny Parata is a disabled, wheelchair-using Maori lesbian, which in any other book I feel like would come across as brownie points. But no, for Jenny, they are all intricate parts of her personality, a wider personality that exists on its own, and is never really used for brownie points. Take for the fact that she uses a wheelchair. She was paralyzed from the waist down in a war, which she and Gary were on opposite sides of. Now that she can't use her legs, she prefers to keep artificial gravity off in the spaceship that belonged to Gary's father. This gives her greater movability in zero gravity than most other people because she's just so used to it. Plus, it makes things easier for her because she doesn't have to rely on her chair and she can just float around. I think that there's a lot of exploration of that sort of stuff in here, which is really interesting because I feel like she'd be reduced to a token in pretty much any other story. And a lot of sci-fi just sort of take the fact that they have advanced technology to get rid of people with disabilities altogether. They're just like, oh, you have bionic limbs now, whatever. Don't think about it. I don't have to acknowledge the fact that you're actually disabled. No, this book doesn't shy away from the fact that she was a disabled war veteran. It also really doesn't shy away from the fact that she's Maori, which is a very important part of this colonialism book. She specifically mentions that the patu she fights with was used by her grandmother in fighting off colonialists back in the colonization of New Zealand. So the fact that she's using it now, going from one side of the colonialist war to the other, is a pretty impressive metaphor. Or at least, I like it. The thing is, Jenny herself has also recently lost the ship in a bar fight. Well, not a bar fight, more of a poker game with a parrot that can see your death. Yeah, it's this kind of book. You'll be seeing that kind of shit just popping up all over the place. And the thing is, it's all so insane that you could just sort of take it and go. At one point they travel to an alternate, well, not really alternate, more like a pocket dimension where everything is bugs. It's called Bug Space. That takes about like 15 pages, and it's important to the plot, but it's not really like the most exciting thing that happens. It's just Bug Space. This is the thing that happens. Like I mentioned, Jenny had set up a cargo run from the Sisterhood of the something or others. It's a long name, you know, it's sci-fi, fantasy. They like to do long names as jokes. The thing is, they're nuns, and I think they can see the future. Some of them can see the future. They're kind of funny. One of them laughs at a 69 joke in this book about colonialism that works really well. This is the best book I've ever read. The Sisterhood want her, Jenny, to take a big-ass load of crates in her ship through Interstellar Drive to the Pimi Summit. Now, I'm finally going to explain what the Pimi are, because I said there are 3 levels of aliens, and I explained the humans and the Bala. The Pimi are basically god aliens. They're omniscient, they have the ability to control time, but the thing is, they don't really give a shit about the Bala or the humans for the most part, because, you know, they've got bigger shit on their enormous plates. Speaking of plates, at one point they bring up everyone's favourite food, and that's a nice moment. It's just a nice moment. The Pimi Summit happens once every 100 years, where the Pimi take a look at how everyone's doing. In the past, that was just how the Bala were getting along with themselves, and, you know, all the different, many kinds of species, which all have different kind of abilities, and the fact that unicorns have, like, literal demigods just walking around. I mean, obviously it's kind of important that they have someone come in, kind of like the UN, and be like, you guys cool down there? The previous summit, exactly 100 years before this, the Pimi... The unicorns say that the Pimi unleashed humans upon us. Basically, they said, hey, humans, Bala, try to get along for a little bit. We'll be back in 100 years, see how that went. How that went was the organ harvesting and war that got Jenny paralyzed, and Gary walking around making sure that no one can see the gaping hole in his head where people scooped out his horn to sell and to power his own ship that he was born on. Basically, we're counting on the Pimi to be pissed. But getting to the Pimi Summit is going to be quite difficult. Here's the thing. The most of the plot is a kind of traditional Star Wars, like jumping from place to place. And it is really fun to read. It's a lot of traditional spacefight action fun, a lot of cool zero-G gravity stuff with Jenny, which is, like I said, zero-G stuff can be kind of overdone in sci-fi, but seeing Jenny being able to move around it in her own unique way because of her paralysis is makes it really refreshing to read, and a lot of fun that it wouldn't otherwise have been. You slowly accumulate this cast of characters. You see like the way human space has been sort of been left to rot in their urgency to round up as many Bala as possible. It's kind of interesting and a really good look at the way colonialism has worked, in that they've let their home planet Earth, I don't know why I had to specify that, you know where we live, they've let Earth sort of decay and global warming eyes, you know, warm globally, and all the major space stations near Earth, they've just sort of left them to rot as they continue to march further into Bala space in search of luxuries, leaving lower class humans stuck on Earth and the nearby space stations to just die poor, which is a really good look at like the way traditional colonialist governments will move out in search of their own benefits and leave their lower class citizens to die. Really good. Like I said, this is a very good book about colonialism, and it's called Space Unicorn Blues. And I'm not going to spoil anything, but the plot gets really, really interesting once they actually get to the Pimi Summit and you find out what's happening. There's really good character evolution throughout this book. For Gary, there isn't honestly that much, because he was always against the human government. It's called The Reason, and it comes from a century-old alliance between Australia, America, and India, which is, again, interesting because these are all countries that were colonized, now becoming colonizers, with, even like in the modern day, like I live in Australia and shit's bad, bro. Gary doesn't get too much character development, except for sort of like a bolstering of bravery and kind of the fact that he has to come to terms with the fact that he might die soon. Like I said, there's a parrot that can see your future, but specifically see the moment you die. And I'm not going to spoil it because that's a really interesting subplot, is Gary figuring out what's going on with his vision and why it didn't really work the way it's supposed to do. Is he going to have to die? Is he going to have to murder someone? That's really cool. I think Jenny has one of the best character developments because, she started out having enslaved Gary to harvest his horn to power the ship that she stole from him. And as you can tell by how positively I'm speaking of her, the way she develops is really interesting. But I'm not going to spoil you. And speaking of not spoiling you, there's someone else on the ship who also goes through changes of character that aren't so much changes as they are magnifications. And opportunities arise that can manipulate existing character flaws to create problems. And I'm not going to say any more, but once you finish this book, this character you will want to stab viciously. You can't see my hands, it kind of looks wrong, I'm sorry. In case you can't tell by the fact of how much fun I'm having making this video and how I'm desperately trying to avoid spoiling you despite having a real run on mouth, I want you to go out and read this book. The author is called T.J. Berry, and it's her first book, and it's amazing. The sequel to this book, I don't know if it's going to be a duology or a wider series, but the next one is coming out on April 2nd, 2019. It's called 5 Unicorn Flush, and I'm really hoping it's going to do very well because T.J. Berry is an excellent writer. I looked her up, and she's done a lot of cool stuff. She mentions in her biography that she had at some point worked in a razor blade factory, which explains why everything is just so batshit insane in here. But what's interesting is that, like, she's white, and I don't know if she's trans or anything, but this is just such a really good story that I would have expected from an Own Voices author. And she's lived in a lot of places, so I think that comes through a lot in here. But I just really think it's important that and anybody who watches this supports this author, because this is her first book and it's really incredible. It's both a lot of fun, a lot of dark humor, while still being like really earnest about its message, but not like lecturing you, just sort of, it's a lot of show don't tell in the way it evokes emotion towards this regime. And I think it's just fantastic, and I want her to do very, very well. I want her next book, the sequel to this, to do amazingly, and I just want more Space Unicorn Blues. I want more of this series, this insane series. You can get it on Amazon, but you know, Amazon sucks, so where else can you get it? Turns out you can get it on Booktopia, and if you live here in Australia with me, you can actually buy it at Angus and Robinson, and if you live in America, you can get it at Barnes & Noble. So, go get it. Go get this book. Go get this really, really good book. And can I say, this is kind of a weird thing to say at the end, but I'm just really, really glad to say, it sounds so insignificant compared to all the other stuff I've said, but I'm just really glad to have an interesting, fun, engaging sci-fi fantasy book where like 90% of it isn't taken up by a stupid romance, because there's a lot of heartfelt feelings in here. There are a lot of established romantic relationships, especially between Jenny and her wife, which is really special and really good to see, but it's not like consuming the storyline. And Gary has a bit of a backstory with someone, and it's really engaging and important to the plot, and it never felt rushed or forced, and it's all just good. Everything about this book is good. Are you getting that I want you to buy it? Thank you for listening to me rant about this bizarrely named, bizarrely themed, amazingly written book. I kind of wish I had some like affiliate links where I could be like, you can get it for cheaper if you click on this link, but I have like 30 subscribers, so that ain't happening. I just hope you pick it up and you read it and you enjoy it. I got this copy from the City of Sydney Library, so it's in libraries. Some libraries. I know it's also in the New York libraries system. Those are the only two libraries I know that have it, but they have it, so other libraries will have it. Ask them. And if they don't have it, it's a recent release, and as someone who works in libraries, if we get requests for recent releases, they're likely to go to the top of the list above the later, the older releases. So if you want your library to get it, you should request it, because it's good. Just wanted to add on a little bit at the end here. If you have been watching my channel for a little while, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. But also at the same time, I know there's been a big gap between my previous video and this video, and I'm very sorry about that. I know I said up front that don't expect like regular updates from me, but I feel bad about not updating for a while. I really do enjoy making these videos. The only excuse I have is that for a while I was sick, and then I had a lot of uni work, and then I had NaNoWriMo. But the biggest issue was, at the end of my previous video, I said I was going to do a series look at Persepolis, its 2 volumes, and the movie. And I sat down and I watched the movie with my friends, and I took a lot of notes, and I read both volumes, and at the end I was like, oh man, this is like serious art, and I'm not that smart. And that rhymed, and I feel embarrassed about it. Yeah, so I just had like a lot of performance anxiety about doing justice to Persepolis. So eventually my loan on the Persepolis volumes ran out, and I felt really bad, and I just didn't do it. But it was just a lack of confidence thing. If you're curious, I really like Persepolis. And maybe in the future, if I get more confident in doing these, and I feel better about the tone of my channel, I want to do like a lot of funny, exciting, cool videos like this one where I just gush about a book I loved. And I don't know if something as serious and important as Persepolis would like fit in with that, but you know, if I do find a way to make it fit, make it work, make myself comfortable with it, then I would like to do a video on Persepolis eventually, but that won't be happening for a long time yet. But anyway, thank you for watching.